I want to say a very big thank you to DCU, to Irish Aid, to Oxfam and to the HSE for having me here this morning, and also obviously for this fantastic day of talking about local and global health issues that are so important. And I want to say that I feel it particularly important at the present time because of the profound inequalities that we heard just a little while ago earlier this morning, and also because of the huge danger there is on the rollback of human rights across the world, and not least, in fact, as a primary target, the rollback or the attempt to roll back on sexual and reproductive rights. So this is a really important time for us to speak up and to, as it were, put our colours, to stick our colours up there and to say that sexual and reproductive rights are absolutely fundamental to human freedom, and that we will not stand for any diminution of the rights of any human being that they should have, and that we will fight for them. And this, I suppose, really is one of the reasons why why I was asked today. I was asked to actually talk about the historical, the context, the background to Repeal the Eighth. I was asked to talk about the campaign, and I was asked to talk about the impacts and the challenges, all in 15 minutes. That's not really possible, but I'm actually going to do a kind of a whirlwind. And some of you, many of you will know a lot of this, but of course some of you won't. And I just want to start off by saying that, you know, I grew up in an Ireland that really was like another planet. There you have young confirmation girls outside some kind of religious building with the man at the apex and the bishop in the middle. And that kind of pyramidal structure seems to me to sum up extremely well the authoritarian, repressive country that I grew up in, hand in glove, church and state, and a particularly tyrannical, oppressive form of Catholicism that we had here. And, you know, all during my growing up years in the 60s and the 70s, well, particularly the 60s, I suppose, I was so conscious of what we could and what we... In fact, you were aware of what you couldn't do. So much so that the attempt to actually get out there and do something was really very, very difficult. We didn't have contraception, never mind abortion. We certainly didn't have even divorce. We certainly didn't have equal pay. There were all kinds of family situations where women were, and in some senses continue, to be very strongly subordinated. At that stage, you could not actually refuse to have sex with your husband. There was an offence known as criminal conversation, and so on and so on. And you could not drink in a pub. You couldn't go in and have pints. You had to go into a little wee snug. And then the Irish women's liberation movement came on board and invaded the snugs and the pubs of Ireland and dived off the 40-foot, which was men only, out in Dún Laoghaire or wherever it is, and got out on the streets and marched. And I'm so glad that Rory mentioned the streets, because getting out on the streets, raising our voices, shouting and roaring, making a noise, and using our feet to show the people that we meant business, that was really very, very important indeed. And one of the very first issues on the agenda, and you got the slide in front of you, was of the pill train to Belfast in 1971, where women went up to buy condoms and demanded them in pharmacies in the north of Ireland. Think of it, the north was ahead of us at that point, and then came back down to the station, which was Amiens Street, held up the condoms and said, "Arrest us, arrest us." And the guards refused to arrest them because they knew, even in 1971, that it would cause absolute outrage. So it would be hard to underestimate the power and the importance of feminism and the women's movement to bring about those kinds of profound changes that we see in our society today, and that we're still working on and working towards. And I would have to say that those years in between, that when it comes to thinking about women's reproductive rights and contraception and abortion most particularly, it has been a very long and a very rocky road. You know, I think of all of those court cases, the alphabet soup that we have of Miss X, Miss C, Miss Y, Miss A, B, and C again, and it just was unending, as we had forecast in the 1983 anti-amendment campaign. We would have all of those cases. The condemnation by international bodies. Time and time and time again, Ireland was in violation of human rights. 12 women at that time travelling every day for abortion abroad, mainly in the UK. Untold suffering and distress. We know the traumas that have been revealed through the church's brutality and cruelty to women. But I think that those stories of distress and suffering that women experienced because they were prevented from accessing abortion or because they had to travel in terrible circumstances, it will take a long time for those stories to surface. And of course, we had 6 referendums. 1983, the Eighth Amendment in the Constitution. 1992, which was 3 referendums in one, on the risk of suicide as grounds for as legal grounds for abortion, and the rights to travel and to information. Imagine, in a democracy, we had to vote as to whether or not we wanted women to have the rights to travel and democracy and information. That was one of the most disgraceful episodes in Irish political history. It hasn't been written about enough in that vein. In 2002, again, we were asked to vote on whether or not we wanted to remove the risk of suicide as grounds for abortion. And again, we said no. We said no in 92, we said no again in 2002, and then finally in 2018, we succeeded in repealing the Eighth Amendment, getting it out of the Constitution. And all that time, women were battered about from court to court and suffered unendingly. But then we did have really a set of turning points. The first, in fact, that I haven't got up on the slide because I had to cut down, was a ruling of the European Court of Human Rights in 2010 in the cases of A, B, and C, cases which were taken with the support of the Irish Family Planning Association here and the Centre for Reproductive Rights. And the ruling told Ireland, you have to legislate in function of the Supreme Court ruling of 1992 in the X case. You have to clarify when it is legal and when it is a crime to have an abortion in Ireland, because the country, successive governments, not just one government, not just one political party, the whole lot of them had absolutely failed to do that. But then, of course, as we know, very shortly after that ruling came the appalling tragedy of the death of Savita Halappanavar, which was, I think, something which outraged Irish people, because at root we were deeply ashamed that a woman died when she need not have died. And she died, it is so interesting, she died because she contracted sepsis following the refusal of the hospital to give her a termination of her pregnancy when she was inevitably miscarrying her very much wanted child. So, that galvanized us. And at that time, the Abortion Rights Campaign started organising its annual marches, and the annual march is coming up now at the end of September. Please get out there, there's so much more work to be done here and everywhere. And the National Women's Council produced a major pro-choice policy paper, and shortly after that, the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment formed, which was really about bringing a broad range of organisations together, because we all figured at that stage that unless we did this, we would not actually manage, unless we all came together right across the whole society and fought for at least getting the Eighth Amendment out of the Constitution first, that we didn't have a chance. And we actually did that. We grew from 12 organisations in 2013 to 119 or something by the time the referendum was called. And we built a very broad wide social movement. I'm sure lots of you have repeal sweaters. But one of the big jobs that we had to do was to put this issue on the agenda. It took a lot of lobbying, it took a lot of briefing, it took a lot of pushing, it took a lot of talking, and it meant raising that public awareness and education had to be raised. So the things like the repeal sweaters started by Anna Cosgrave was really, really, really important. And eventually, after a citizens' assembly in 2017, which made amazingly progressive recommendations, you could have knocked me back with a feather when they recommended 14 weeks access to abortion on request. We had hoped for something reasonably progressive. This was a bit more than we had expected. And finally, after the joint Oireachtas committee made a recommendation to government, the campaign was called. And I think I may have, I'm not sure, 3 organisations came together at that point to be the kind of the leadership vehicle for the campaign. And we were all very highly networked organisations. And on our executive, we also were fortunate enough to have the Irish Family Planning Association as well. And I think one of the things that really emerged from the day we launched, you can see that this was a very young campaign. It was young, it was vibrant, it was absolutely full of energy, and it was totally determined. And what we really needed to do, and we knew that from the work we had done previously, we knew the people are sovereign and the people think in a referendum. This is our decision. This is not for political parties or governments to tell us what to do. We make up our own minds. So we knew, and this was based on research we'd been doing, that we needed to speak directly to the voters, not as in a completely cross-party or even non-party way, that we needed to speak to them about their fears and their worries and their concerns, and that we needed to do so very clearly. So we made strategic decisions. As we started that campaign, we knew our strategy was to focus on the voters who were not against and were not for. They needed time to think. People said, people had their minds made up, you didn't need a campaign at all. The absolute nonsense. People wanted to hear why they should repeal the Eighth Amendment, and it was our job to tell them. So we had our 3 core messages were that the 3 C's of care, compassion, and change, with very much an emphasis on abortion as a healthcare need, and that this was something which is not just about women and girls, not just about trans people who need abortion. This was about absolutely everybody in this country. It was about what we thought of ourselves as a country, what kinds of values we espoused. And we needed to get out there and talk directly to the voters. And I think that one of the most important, the key thing that we really did was to shift the terms of the whole debate and discussion away from the terrain of our opposition over onto a different kind of terrain where we could have real conversations about women's health and why women need abortion for their health and well-being. And I take on the World Health Organization definition of health as being about our overall well-being. That it was certainly a right, absolutely. And it was also, however, very importantly about care. Did we care about women, and could women get the care that women needed? And that rather than relying on legal or even medical expertise, that it was those experiences that women had that really would be key in shifting how people thought. And that fundamentally, in this country, we absolutely needed to move from that judgmental stance, which is always a prohibitive, negative, no, thou shalt not do this or that. We needed to work and to talk and to speak and to think with compassion to understand women's needs. So that was really what our campaign did, was to try to focus on that. And I'm sorry, I don't have a poster of it, but I think one of our most impactful posters was a lovely one which said very simply, a woman you love might need your yes. So it just was about absolutely everybody. Another campaign we had was She Lives on Your Street. And that was also really important, about seeing abortion not as something that happens to people you don't know and don't approve of and don't like and would treat as pariahs. No, she lives on your street, she's in your family, she's you maybe, who knows? And I think just to resume very quickly, because I am conscious of the time, I know you're going to give me a wave now, just some of the key features of the campaign. I think it was important that it was women-led and feminist. I think this is an issue we needed to lead on, and we were determined to do that. And it gave us, of course, a real sense of our own authority to speak of these matters. It was also an incredibly young campaign with a big boost for marriage equality. I remember at the vote of the counting of the votes of the marriage equality referendum, being down in the RDS with one of my big bags as usual and going around with my leaflets that I just had made for the day, saying to people, you know what's next, you know what's next. And they were saying, would you ever put your bag away? Celebrate for a day. And I'm saying, yes, but we know that this means we can move on. We've done it once, we can definitely do it again. That was the momentum that we grasped. And we were very clear about what we were about. We had long-term strategy and cooperation through the coalition and working together in many different ways. We had that very precise focus of repeal the Eighth Amendment. It was just get that out, because you couldn't do anything without it. And we had our identity or our brand. And we did use and had brilliant professional people working with us. And we did the research. We were researching from 2016 on to know what is in people's heads and what are their fears. And then I think, and the massive ground mobilisation, I can't tell you, I don't have the time, but the numbers, the thousands and thousands of people, I'm sure many of you, people still come up to me in the street and say, couldn't do very much, but I was out the week before, or I was out the day before, or I worked with my family, or whatever. But I do want to say that stories were an absolute heart of the campaign. There were many projects, the Exile Project, everyday stories, and the wonderful In Her Shoes. And this is just an image from, I think it was Limerick, where we said to people, you may not approve. It may not be something you would do for you, but can you put yourself in the shoes of the person who does need an abortion? And can you understand that and not prevent that from happening? And it was incredibly brave and courageous of women and couples to stand up, and it was deeply moving. And we do know that in campaigns, in voting, people vote from their hearts. They want the arguments to their heads, but they vote from their hearts. I think is it here. That's where we vote from always. So some of our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful campaigners. And as you know, 66.4%, what could be better? And I think, you know, the impacts, and I'm just going to spend 1 minute on this, the impacts have been felt, are being felt now in Ireland. We know from the Abortion Support Network in Britain that the numbers of women travelling to the UK have not entirely dried up, because our legislation remains restrictive, but they have dropped hugely, hugely, hugely. So we do know that there was a very immediate impact. By March, those figures had dropped. But we do need to bear in mind that our legislation is still very restrictive. After 12 weeks, there is a certain lack of clarity, because there is this serious risk to health still in there. So there are many difficulties and problems. We also have this insulting 3-day cooling off period. You go to your GP, you say, I want an abortion, and your GP says, yes, that's grand, now go home and think about it for 3 days and come back in 3 days' time and tell me that you still want an abortion. And that really is insulting to the decision-making capacity of ordinary, everyday, normal people. So I do think we still don't have the safe exclusion zones, and it's still on the criminal statute books. Not a crime for a woman to seek or have an abortion, but it is for medical professionals to conduct an abortion outside the terms, very strict terms of the legislation. So we have a lot more work to do. And however, we have got over that hurdle, and the North, the hurdle is still there. We hope that after the 21st of October, the hurdle will disappear, both for lesbian and gay equal access to marriage and also for abortion. So when I heard this morning on the radio coming over the possibility that the Assembly may reconvene before the 21st of October, I thought, no, please, no, I want the Assembly to reconvene, but not just yet, Lord, not just yet. So this would be a tremendous victory in the North and very long overdue. And we work in solidarity, obviously, in the North. I hope that globally, and I believe it is, that our victory here, it was unexpected internationally, perhaps less unexpected nationally, but certainly internationally. My goodness, Ireland voted yes in a huge majority. I think and I hope that that is a source of great encouragement and hope, a real beacon of light for all those who are still struggling and fighting to defend rights or to gain rights. And I was touched really at, and quite amused at a panel I was at a conference abroad, and the question put to the panel, and we were from all over the place, was, well, do you think does what's happening in the USA at the moment have a negative impact on your campaigning in your country? And everybody on the panel said, yes, it does, except me. And I said, actually, I hope that what happened in Ireland has a very positive impact on the USA. And I think it was probably the first time in my life that I've really felt that we could actually have that impact. And I do think it absolutely matters. And we were very touched indeed after our passion, planning, unity and solidarity is the key word in all the work we do. I'm sure it is for all of you. We were very touched. There I am with Orla O'Connor from the National Women's Council and Gráinne Griffin from the Abortion Rights Campaign, the three co-directors of Together for Yes. When we were nominated on the 100 most influential people in the world list, you can't imagine. One of the great pleasures of my life at that time was men very nicely and kindly and generously coming up and saying, well done for being on the list of 100 most powerful women. I said, not women. They would say what? I'd say, people. So there you have it. But we have a lot to do. And I know, I feel that what we all did together in Repeal helps us to go on and fight more here in this country, but also to fight for everyone all over the world globally, with our shouting, our roaring, and getting out on our feet, and just doing it. Thank you all very much.